If you're an endurance athlete, doing 20-minute and even an hour workout is not going to help you if you are participating in an Ironman that's going to take you, anywhere from 10 to 17 hours to complete. Hi, welcome to the Judy Torel Show, where I explore topics intended to optimize every body 50, 60, 70, and above. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Judy Torel Show. If you are joining me on this podcast, then you are in the first of 6 episodes of my series on how to train as an you ready? 60-year-old and over endurance athlete. So let me explain a little bit about why I've chosen this topic for this podcast series and define some terms. And then this episode is going to be me explaining about what I'm going to cover over the series of 6 episodes, so that by the time you're done with all 6 of them, you got a good working model about how to structure your training if you are over 60 and participating in endurance activities. So what are endurance activities, first of all? So when I'm talking about endurance activities, I am specifically referencing people who are competing and participating in half Ironman and over distances for triathlons, people who are doing marathon and longer ultra distance running, and people who are still participating in cycling events that, last, I'd say are 40 miles and longer, or durations of 3 hours and longer. So we're talking about people who are, not your average 60-year-olds and not even your average fit 60-year-olds, but hence my term endurance athlete 60 and older. I'm happy to say that there is a growing number of people in this age rate bracket, 60 plus, that are doing these events. And that is a great thing. It's, by far a minority of people who are in the 60 plus age bracket. But, I feel like as time progresses, and people get older and we're living longer and we have more, science to help us to be younger at 60 plus, the number of people participating is only going to be growing as the decades continue. But, I'll be timing out at that point. But there's still many of us who are in this 60 plus category that are right now participating in these events. And so, there isn't as much research and science for the 60 plus people as there is for younger people. But there is some. And so I want to relay that to the people who are watching this series. Now, who am I to, say that I can even speak on this? Well, number one, I am 60 years old, at least a couple months off it. So I'm in my 60th year, let's put it that way. And I participate in Ironman distance events still. As of last year, I was still doing ultra distance runs of 24, 48 hours in duration and 100 plus miles at any one given, event. So I have my own, body experience to speak to this issue. In addition, I'm a coach, so I am coaching people. I've specialized in 50 plus for a decade now, and I have a growing number of clients that are 60s, in their 60s, and in their 70s, who are still participating in these events. So, I've been working with them intimately for, like I said, over a decade, almost going on 2 decades now. And even though I'm not in my 70s yet, and I'm just into my 60s, I have been working with individuals who have, in these age categories and, intimately, day after day, prescribing their workouts and then tracking their physiological and psychological reactions to them. And so I have insight from the coaching of people who are in the 60 to 70 age range. And in addition to those 2 criteria, I also almost lost my that wasn't a spasm. I just dropped my notebook. Reaction time is you want to keep reaction time very good as you're aging as well, but that's a different topic. So in addition to my own experience in my own body as an ultra endurance athlete and coaching clients that are 60 plus in this category for like 15 years, I really do strive to keep up on the science and the information that there's a growing amount of, but still not a lot of, for training people who are doing these endurance sports in the 60 plus category. So for those three reasons, I am putting out this podcast and this series. And, I'm hoping that if you are in this category yourself, this is going to be of benefit to you and valuable to you, because, as I peruse through podcasts and, the things that are out for, public consumption, there's a lot of things for people in their 50s right now, but then you get to 60 and there's it becomes a ghost town. So I want to be able to provide some information into that void. So that is the motivation for doing this topic and the reason why I am doing it. And I say I can have the expertise to put out some information on this. All right. So now I've already defined my term. Like, who am I talking about as an endurance athlete? So if you are listening and you know that you are participating in half Ironman level triathlons and longer, and you're participating in marathons and longer, or cycling events over 3 hours and longer, then and you're 60 and over, then you are someone I'm targeting to listen to this series. All right. Now, there's a variety of things that come into, what do you need to know so that you can still be performing at your best, but adapting to your state of life, 60s, 70s, and older, that you need to know that are imperative to your training, and many of which, the principles of which you might need to apply them in your weekly your weekly, bi-weekly, and monthly trainings are going to be a different criteria than what you might have been doing when you're in your 50s and 40s, 30s, and 20s, if you were doing them at that age. And so let's talk about what are some of the variables that go into a training plan and training for these events that I'm going to address in these subsequent episodes in this series. So number one is, if you're an endurance athlete, then you have to be doing, longer workouts. So, right now, the literature that's coming out for aging athletes is that, for a variety of reasons having to do with aging, doing these longer trainings becomes less desirable. What you get out of it for having done them is a decline. And so there's a big movement in the 60 plus population for training at shorter, higher intensity durations. But if you're an endurance athlete, doing 20-minute and even an hour workout is not going to help you if you are participating in an Ironman that's going to take you, anywhere from 10 to 17 hours to complete. So balancing, how do you balance doing these longer trainings that are necessary for your sport with the current science that is indicating that as you're over 60, you need to let those longer duration workouts go to the wayside and really kind of focus in on these shorter, more intense workouts, because the physiology of an aging body will respond better to those. So how do you balance that? Number two, just hearing that these higher intensity workouts are more important for the 60 plus athlete flies in the experience of your own body, because as we age, and I can tell you this from my own experience, when I'm looking at having to do an interval training type of workout versus a longer, slower one, that's intense because it's longer, but not intense in the total output or the moments of the output. I, like most 60 plus athletes, are going to acquiesce and resonate towards wanting to do the longer, slower one. But the science is showing that, the intensity workouts are actually better for us in the long run and in our athletic performance. But the science also shows that as you're 60 and over, you need longer recovery from more intense efforts. So, how do you juggle, like, staying with the duration of things that are, inherent to your sport and the level of which you do as an endurance athlete, and, getting the high-end trainings that are still necessary, and even more necessary as we get older, because there's an atrophy to those higher ends if you're not keeping them in your workouts. But you need more recovery time from the high intensity workouts. So how do you balance those two things into your weekly training plan becomes an art and a science that is different than when you're even in your 50s, and definitely when you're in your 40s, 30s, 20s, and younger. So those are a couple things. Now, in addition to, that's the cardiovascular output, it is very important as we age that we have to keep strength training in our routines, our weekly and bi-weekly training, program, even more so than when we were younger, because if we're not, because of hormonal changes and all these things I've been talking about, hormonal changes, recovery levels, and stress levels that your body needs to recover from play a part. And the hormones in particular, growth hormone, testosterone, estrogen, cortisol, all play a part in an atrophy of muscle on your body. So we need to be including more so in our 60s and older, the strength component, even though we are endurance cardiovascular athletes. Protocols for that typically have been you need to lift heavy and lower reps in order to get muscle development. But as you're older, because of those hormonal changes that I talked about and other reasons, doing that kind of workout, you're more susceptible to injury. So how do you get the muscle, strength and development if the muscle loading that has been said to provide that result is counterindicated for your age? Interesting dilemma here. What the research is showing is that now we don't have to do such a high rate of the loading. We can use a more moderate load, but go to failure with more reps. And that is actually showing the same muscle growth that we used to get when we had to use heavier weight, but less reps. But I'm going to get into a whole episode on that in this series. But, long trainings for your sport, high intensity workouts to keep you able to do your sport, and then keeping strength training in there at a more moderate but to failure level, so you're getting the results that you're after. Like those three balls right there, how do you juggle those when you're trying to design or follow a plan that you might get online, but you're 60 plus, and it's really not designed for a 60 plus person. In addition, when you're 60 plus, no matter what you're doing, especially the high intensity and the longer duration and the strength training that I just mentioned, we actually need more recovery time from those kind of training efforts. So, how do you fit all that into a week if you need more recovery time and you need all three of those variables? Again, that becomes a training dilemma if you're 60 plus. And then a final topic that I'm going to address in this series is, you can't just go by how you feel at the same way that you could have maybe when you were younger. We need, as 60 plus athletes, to have some, what are called metrics. And what I mean by metrics are, physiological things that we're tracking so that we can, see that our body's actually breaking down before we're actually feeling it. Because by the time we feel it, that might be problematic or have already resulted in an injury or a burnout that we have to dig ourselves back out of a hole that's going to take, maybe several months. So what I mean by metrics, what do we need to be following? And these are ones that we have devices that are at our availability that weren't available when we were younger. So we have to have devices and methods for tracking resting heart rate. We have to have tracking for heart rate variability. We have to have tracking for amount of time spent in each of the sleep stages, like light, deep, and REM. We also, need to rely on our own, performance output. So if we have a certain heart rate that we usually reach at a certain level of intensity on a bike ride or a run, monitoring that to see if we're at the same pace, we're at the same heart rate, and following those physiological measures. Those I'm going to cover in an episode on this series on what we need to follow and how to track on them and what to look for so that we're not digging ourselves into a hole as we think we're like making ourselves stronger by following training principles from when we were younger. I'm wearing an Oura ring right here. This is an infrared reader that helps to track heart rate variability and stages of sleep. It's a valuable piece of equipment to have. I rely on it a lot as I'm now, through my upper 50s and now into my 60s, and I'm going to use it, I'm sure, moving forward and then other things too that come out. But these are the ones that are already out that we can use, so I'm going to talk to you about them. So that's a general overview about some of the issues of training as an endurance athlete in your 60s and 70s. And this is my intro to this series. So you got, I've discussed what we're going to cover. So follow me in the next series, the next episode of the series. I'm going to talk about, intensity and how to build that into your training plans in a way that's appropriate for, enhancing your athletic ability at 60 and 70 and older and not having it be undermining. So next episode is about intensity and how to build that into your plan. This episode was about, defining our terms and, what are some of the things that come into play as an aging endurance athlete. And I hope I got you excited for the next 5 episodes because, my mantra, and I'm ending my podcast with this all the time, is my goal in these podcasts is to make our second 50 years of life even better than our first 50, just in general, but also as athletes, hence this podcast. So stay tuned for the next episode, and be well. Thanks for listening, everybody. And if you'd like to have access to some of my additional resources, I can be found at Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and on my website, www.judytorel.com.